Is Friday the actual day of the week for Christ's crucifixion? Because Jesus said he will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, and simply charting this out is that you're 1 night short with a Friday crucifixion. So, is Good Friday actually correct? In this video, you'll find out. Now, if that introduction didn't create some type of emotional response, I would be shocked. Needless to say is that Matthew 12:40's statement has some to cause question on whether or not the traditional Friday view is correct, and many have actually opted to go to a Thursday or even a Wednesday crucifixion. So, wherever you stand, all I ask is please watch the entirety of this video. This is going to be the most thorough treatment on the topic that you'll ever come across. I've read over a dozen articles. I've watched every YouTube video that I could come to watch on the topic. And needless to say is that, yes, there is a definitive correct answer to this question. I'm not going to punt and say, but the most important thing is the resurrection. Yes, it is, but there is a correct answer to which day of the week that Jesus actually did die on. So let's dive right in. For the Friday position, the easiest verses to point to are the ones that describe that Jesus was buried on the day before the Sabbath. This is described by Mark, Luke, and John that all clearly say that the day before the Sabbath was the crucifixion. And since the Old Testament is abundantly clear that the seventh day of the week is the Sabbath day, is that Friday proponents say Mark, Luke, and John are clearly placing the crucifixion on Friday with a Sunday resurrection. Now, something that needs to be understood is that the Jewish day began at sundown at basically 6 p.m. This was established right from creation, as God referenced each day with first the evening, then the morning. Leviticus 23:27 describes the Day of Atonement occurring on the 10th day of the 7th month, with verse 32 adding on calling it a Sabbath day. But here's the important clause. In the 9th day of the month at evening, from evening unto evening, shall you celebrate your Sabbath. This is the most explicit showcase that the Jewish day was reckoned from evening to evening. Nehemiah 13:19 describes Nehemiah ordering the gates to be closed before sunset, before the Sabbath day commenced. So, basically, we have 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. as the night, and 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. as the day portion of the Jewish day. Jesus even made the remark about there being 12 hours in the day in John 11:9. So, in the Passion accounts, we have references to the 9th hour of the day as the time that Jesus died on the cross. 9 hours from sunrise at 6 a.m. puts you at 3 p.m. You can see that Joseph of Arimathea saw evening coming, i.e. the Sabbath day, and needed to move fast to get Jesus' body buried properly before then, as Deuteronomy 21:23 says that a man is cursed if he remains hanging on a tree all night long. Mark says the same thing as Matthew with hours of the day for Jesus' passion. Luke says the same as well. And John doesn't say anything about the 9th hour, but mentions the 6th hour or noontime. And just for comic relief, remember that at Pentecost, the crowd accused Peter and the group of being drunk, but Peter replied that it was only the 3rd hour of the day, i.e. 9 a.m. in the morning. So that is why we have the switch over to the next day at 6 p.m. at night on our calendar here. But at this point, the Wednesday, Thursday proponents enter in and say, sorry, this doesn't satisfy Matthew 12:40's 3 days and 3 nights. And critics like Skeptics Annotated Bible Site like to say this is a clear example of internal contradictions between the Gospels. Wednesday, Thursday advocates probably bring up other verses that say that Jesus will rise after 3 days. A possible tag-along point that some might bring up is to say that Mark 15:42 can be interpreted differently because of the concept of the new Jewish day beginning at the evening. So they would say, look, Mark says that evening had come, therefore there would be a switch over into the next day on the calendar, which Mark says was this day before the Sabbath. So you follow that? So this is how that interpretation would look if that was a little confusing. It has a Thursday crucifixion in view by interpreting Mark 15:42 differently, and this gets you the 3 days and 3 nights checked off. But if you're thinking, yeah, but Jesus rose Sunday morning, the reply to that would be, no. The only thing that the Gospels say is that when the women had arrived, is that the tomb was only empty. And John 21 says that it was still dark, implying that this is occurring before 6 a.m., the first hour of the daytime. So this is saying that Jesus rose sometime between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. This doesn't rule out a Sunday resurrection because you still have between 12 and 6 a.m. on Sunday in the Roman calendar. That does work. You just put Jesus' resurrection between 6 p.m. to midnight if you're having some problems with getting the Sunday part included. So just to show you here is that, this gets kind of weedy because you're having to mesh different calendrical approaches in the ancient world. The next point of conflict is that they will bring up is Jesus' journey from Ephraim to Bethany in John 12:1. That says that the Passover took place 6 days before the Passover. That the Passion took place 6 days before the Passover. Why, or no, whoa, I was way off there again. That the journey took place 6 days before the Passover. Why this journey is cited is because of the length. It's well over 20 miles, and this distance breaks what is called the Sabbath day journey rule. That phrase is brought up only in Acts 1:12 in the New Testament. This journey is the permissible distance allowed for a Jew to travel on the Sabbath day without being considered having done work. It's said to be 2,000 cubits, just under 2/3 of a mile. Exodus 16:29 says, "Let no man go out of his place on the Sabbath." So nobody could go out and do any work. That's, rule number one. But still, people have to somewhat move around, during their Sabbath observation. They're not just going to sit in a chair in the corner of their house, for a straight 24-hour period. So it's likely that Numbers 35:5 description of 2,000 cubits extending in all 4 cardinal directions for the Israelite camp as where the Sabbath journey got its limitation from. Joshua 3:4 also talks about 2,000 cubits being the minimum distance between the Israelites and the Ark of the Covenant when it passes by. So the late Chuck Missler, probably the most well-known advocate for a Wednesday crucifixion, will point this out in his online presentation and his article, both freely accessible. Another well-known site, the Blue Letter Bible, as well sees this journey problematic for Friday proponents because having Jesus crucified on Friday has the person rewinding the clock back 6 days, and this lands you on the Sabbath with Jesus' journey breaking that rule, which cannot happen. A third point they will likely bring up is that in Matthew 28:1 is that the word Sabbath is not in the singular in the Greek, but actually plural. So it should be read as Sabbaths, like in the Berean literal, the literal standard, and Young's how they have it. So, because of this, is that they will say that Matthew 28:1 confirms that there were multiple Sabbaths that week, and this, at minimum, pushes the crucifixion before Friday. This then removes the conflict between Jesus' journey and the Sabbath. A tag-along point to this is the women visiting the tomb with the focus on the spices for Jesus' body that they prepared. Only two Gospels discuss this, Mark in 16:1 and Luke in 23:56. Now here's the kicker. Mark says that the spices were purchased after the Sabbath, but Luke says that the women prepared the spices before the Sabbath as they observed the Sabbath Commandment. So, how can it be both before and after the Sabbath with a Friday crucifixion? This is where the Wednesday Advocate jumps in and says, you can't harmonize this with a Thursday crucifixion either. But a Wednesday crucifixion now has Friday falling after and before a Sabbath day, where the women and their spices can perfectly fall between. A fourth point that both Chuck and Blue Letter bring up is a typological one. Paul flat out calls Jesus our sacrificed Passover lamb. This prefigurement was realized after the fact, and the same is true for the writer of Hebrews that said that Isaac served as a figure from Genesis 22 of the Messiah's resurrection and ascension back to the Father. So, Chuck and Blue Letter point to the ark resting on the 17th day of the 7th month. How they say this is connected is that in Exodus 12, with the institution of the Passover, is that God shifted the calendar by 6 months. So, at the first Passover, God said that the 7th month is now the 1st month. Thus, the ark actually rested on the 17th day of the 1st month. And since Passover is on the 14th day of the 1st month, is that you, uncoincidentally, have 3 days and 3 nights between the 2 days. So, the ark resting, or you could say rising, out of the flood waters, is that could be seen as a prefigurement of Christ's resurrection. So, the 14th would be on Thursday, and the 17th on Sunday, with 3 days and 3 nights being checked off for Matthew 12:40. As you can see is that I included the name Nisan for the 1st month, as this name was adopted from the Babylonian calendar when the Jews were in exile during the exile period. Esther 3:7 denotes the 1st and 12 months with their adopted names. Outside of this, only Nehemiah 2:1 uses Nisan in the Old Testament. So, that is why I included the month's name in, because you will see or read this pretty much everywhere else. So I don't want anybody confused, but, also maybe it helps clear things up as we go throughout all this. So, here's the Thursday layout, and here's the Wednesday layout with the Jewish dates included. And what adds to the 15th of Nisan being a Sabbath is that in Leviticus 23:6-7, it says that the 15th day of the 1st month is the beginning of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The first day of that 7-day festival is declared as a holy convocation, which is said to have no work done on it, i.e., a day of rest. So, this shows you how a different day of the week can be called a Sabbath day or a day of rest. Now, if you have watched Chuck's videos on this, is that you likely know where he goes next. The last point that Chuck points out is to a Wednesday crucifixion is a prophetical fulfillment one. He points out that the next day after the Bethany journey is that this is the day when Jesus enters Jerusalem on what we typically call Palm Sunday. This event would actually now be placed on Saturday. The significance of that placement to him is that Exodus 12:3 said that Jews were to select the household sacrificial lamb on the 10th day of the first month. So, adding in the dates is that you can see Jesus' triumphal entry falling on the 10th day of Nisan on this calendar, which again is no mere coincidence to Chuck, as Jesus is our Passover lamb from Paul. Chuck then says is that this layout is confirmed by Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy. Chuck is a chartist, if you want to say it, and he often charts out his views very clearly in his presentation, which is very helpful to follow along. Same reason why I do it. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and sometimes the guy who's talking is a little confusing maybe. So you can see here from his and you could also read his 70 weeks book on Kindle for 99 cents if you want to go that route. In there, he mentions how he was inspired by Sir Robert Anderson's The Coming Prince. The link is a place here where you can download and read that for free, or again, just go to Kindle and read it for 99 cents if you want. Their chart looks like so. Both of them have a gap between the 69th and 70th week, with the church being raptured before the tribulation period begins. For our purposes here is that this first 69 weeks of their system is the focus of ours for today. They start the 70 weeks with Artaxerxes' proclamation to Nehemiah to go and finish rebuilding the Jerusalem wall. The end of the 69 weeks is said to be at Jesus' triumphal entry, with Luke 19:44 cited as the main supporting verse, as Jesus says that the people didn't know the time of their visitation. The time reference is seen as an allusion to the 70 weeks that the Jews should have known from, calculating from, off of it. Now, the first thing is that if you simply add 483 years on, is that you land at 39 AD, which is 3 years past Pontius Pilate's and High Priest Caiaphas's last year in their positions. Rabbis online like to use this as an example to undermine all Christian interpretation of the 70 weeks by pointing out that this is a clear overshot, while never bringing up that there are different views and systems out there. But also is that they won't share how Chuck and others rectify this overshooting. Chuck will share verses from Daniel and Revelation about how many days or months make up the 3.5-year period of time, times, and half a times. John's verses are quite clear that 42 months, 3.5 years, are equal to 1,260 days. That, when broken down, is 360 days per year, not 365.25. A 360 calendar can be biblically pointed out by using the flood narrative, as this span of time between the rain starting and the ark resting is exactly 5 months of 30 days each. In a lunar solar calendar is that you cannot find a 5-month span that has 30 days in each of them. So, from this is that you can make a scriptural case for a 360-day calendar. Another way that you might have heard these days referred to as prophetic years. Regardless, is that the math of using 360 days multiplied by the 483 years in the first 69 weeks gets you 173,880 days. Now, between 445 BC and 32 AD is that you have 476 solar years. That, when multiplied by the normal 365.25, is is that you are only 140 days short of Daniel's 69 weeks. But then taking into account that we have a partial year that includes 24 days and also leap years, is that they will say that there are 116 of those between those two years, is that there is your last 140 days that are found where you actually have exactly the same 173,880 days, matching Daniel's first 69 weeks when using a 360-day calendar. Rewind and watch it as many times as you need, or just stare at the math here until it clicks. So, with that formula, is that your endpoint retracts back from 39 AD to 32 AD. Now, Chuck says all of these points prove that a Wednesday crucifixion is correct. So, overall, there are 6 proposed reasons from the Gospel accounts and 2 prophetical ones from the Old Testament that will be cited by those who take either a Wednesday or a Thursday crucifixion view. Now that's quite a bit to be fire-hosed with, especially if this is the first time you've ever heard of an alternative view to the traditional Good Friday position. And to be honest, is that it actually got me the first time that I heard of it as well. And what you can probably tell, though, is that I just used a past tense statement and that I do not any longer hold to an alternative view. I hold a Friday view because, as you're going to see, is that it's pretty clear that every New Testament writer had Friday, or the 6th day of the week, in view, because there is a lot more that the Wednesday and Thursday proponents won't bring up in their discussions. And at the same time, I will explicitly address each one of the points that they just made earlier in the presentation there. And to start this whole train off is that we're going to go right back to Jesus' death on the cross. The next thing that happens is Jesus' burial. We've already seen Mark and Luke and John say that it was the day before the Sabbath. But notice that these clauses are using that as though they're defining something, and that is what the gospel writers call is the day of preparation. Matthew too brings this up, but here he is saying that the chief priests and Pharisees' request to the Pilate came the day after the preparation for the guards to be placed in front of the tomb. In all, you have 6 occurrences in the New Testament of this word, 3 in the Synoptics and 3 in John that are all tied to the crucifixion. In other Jewish writings, only Flavius Josephus uses it in similar use. In Antiquities, Book 16, Chapter 16, he describes how Augustus granted special favor to the Jews to have liberty to make use of their own customs, and says, and that they not be obliged to go before any judge on the Sabbath day, nor on the day of the preparation to it after the 9th hour. Josephus is clearly talking about the weekly Sabbath. And we have paraskue used here referring to the day before the Sabbath, i.e. Friday, at 3 p.m. when no more Roman judging could be done with the Jews to avoid any Sabbath problems. If that didn't send some chills down your spine, as this perfectly mirrors the Passion accounts of Jesus going before Pilate early in the morning and him dying at 3 p.m., where the soldier pierces his side to make sure that he was dead. This left 3 hours for Joseph of Arimathea to go before Pilate and bury Jesus before the Sabbath had officially started. What also adds to the preparation day, being Friday, is from Exodus 16. We've already seen God establish the 7th day rule in verses 29 through 30. But what's the context of this chapter here all about? It's about the manna from heaven and the Israelite collection process of it. Now, hear verses 4 and 5. Then said the Lord unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them, whether they will walk in my law or not. And it shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. Right there, God himself says that the 6th day of the week, i.e. Friday, is the preparation day for the weekly Sabbath. Nowhere else does Moses use this word in conjunction with any other day, holy day, and never use the word in Leviticus either when laying out all of the feast calendars. He could have used it later in Exodus 23 if those feast days required it. But he didn't, and as said, he never used it in Leviticus either. Similar to this mandate from God is the Sabbath land rest law that he instituted. This pattern follows the same period of 7 that the normal week follows, and what makes it mirror the Friday preparation is that God anticipates the Jews being a little concerned about not having enough food on the 7th year when they're not farming the land, and so he says the following. Then I will command my blessing upon you in the 6th year, and it shall bring forth fruit for 3 years. God essentially says the Jews sowing in the field is going to be a triple production that will make them prepared for the 7th year, and technically enough for the 8th as well. So, that is the first major reason why the crucifixion was on Friday. And if you're still a Wednesday or Thursday holder at this point, is just ask yourself this simple question. When you come across articles or videos advocating for either Wednesday or Thursday, is that do they ever bring this term up? Nope. And that should tell you something. It's either they don't know it or they're choosing to avoid it. It's one or the other. So, we have eliminated the idea of reinterpreting Mark 15:42 from that. Let's now cover number 5 with the whole reconciliation of the women and their spices. The Wednesday view thinks they got this reconciled by posing the question of how can this event be both before and after the Sabbath with a Friday crucifixion? How they are framing this is that these two passages are speaking about the same moment in time, and that Mark 16:1's buying of the spices preceded Luke 23:56 preparing of the spices. Well, yeah. How you have to buy them first if you want to then prepare them. Okay. Why this thinking is wrong is because the advocate here is divorcing these passages away from their own context and sections. Mark 16:1 is tied to the women visiting the empty tomb on Sunday, the first day of the week. So, right off the bat, this reconciliation has failed for the Wednesday advocate. But also, Luke 23:56 context is of Christ's burial. So, all of this portrayal is completely wrong. It should be seen that the spice references are referring to two different moments in time, as the two Gospels here are referring to two different days completely. The women simply bought more spices on Sunday because they likely didn't have enough after initially preparing them from Luke's account. That's a simple, oh yeah, I ran out. We need more. Okay, let's go buy more. We've all done that at the grocery store a few times when preparing meals. Now, a Wednesday person could say, I was never trying to merge them and place them on a Friday. Okay. But then answer the question of why didn't the women simply return to the tomb on Friday? Because this day is completely open to them. You could still go, hey, yeah, I'd put it with Jesus' burial and then on the resurrection. That's fine. But see that little gap there on Friday? Why didn't they just come back then and finish his body? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. So the spices actually weakens the Wednesday position and strengthens the Friday one. And actually, in this process, we eliminate number 5 from the list. And if you go back to Luke 23:56, is that it's the last verse in chapter 23, and 24 opens up saying the following. Now upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came unto the sepulchre, bringing the spices which they had prepared, and certain others with them. The Lucan narrative flows seamlessly from 23:56 to 24:1 with this layout. And here comes the second major reason for Friday. With that, at the end of verse 56, Luke says the women rested according to the commandment. I just hope right now people aren't asking, what commandment? Because Luke is referring to the Sabbath commandment from the 10 Commandments, which can be found in Exodus 28 through 11 and Deuteronomy 5:12 through 15. People, Luke has clearly locked you into a Friday, Saturday, Sunday chronology. And he isn't done either, as we'll be coming back to him again here shortly. So, we have our second major reason why the crucifixion was on Friday. And at this point in the video, if you're still a Wednesday or Thursday person, after both of these reasons, which are just, they're stone cold, just too good to overcome, is that, again, if you come across the Wednesday or Thursday videos out there, is that do they ever bring this up? No. Do they ever go this deep into Luke 23:56? No. And you know that. Now, but I'm guessing you're wondering, what about the multiple Sabbaths from Matthew 28:1? You can't have multiple Sabbaths occurring on Saturday. Yeah, you can. You see here on the chart is that this Sabbath is also the 15th of Nisan, which is the beginning of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the 15th is declared as a holy convocation, which said no service work could be done on it, i.e., it was a day of rest from regular work. So, it just so happened that on this particular year, the 15th of Nisan fell on a Saturday. And this is why John, in the same passage where he said Jesus died on the day of preparation, said that for that Sabbath day was a high day. In the Greek, it's megas hemera. So it was a special great day, and this coincides with Matthew's use of the plural for Sabbaths in 28:1 because the 15th of Nisan fell on the Sabbath day in that particular year. So the multiple Sabbaths point actually becomes part of why the crucifixion was on Friday. So number 4 is eliminated, and from here, I'm going to go to number 7 now, that deals with the whole typology part of the arc on the 17th of Nisan point, because the shift of the day now puts Nisan 17 on Monday and not on Sunday. So, if you're looking at it, the simple question is, did I somehow violate a prophecy here? No. We know Paul flat out calls Jesus our sacrifice Passover lamb. He also said Jesus' resurrection is the first fruits, And this is in connection with the first fruits offering on Sunday during the festival of unleavened bread. We also saw the writer of Hebrews connect Isaac to Jesus' resurrection and ascension as well. But nowhere does any New Testament writer connect the ark's rest on the mountain to Jesus. The closest you can get is in 1 Peter 3:19 through 21, with Peter talking about the Genesis 6 fallen angels in prison after the flood. If you doubt that interpretation, please go watch the video on this as I go through all views, and you will see quite clearly that the fallen angelic view of Genesis 6 is the correct one. So, that's the context of verses 19 through 20. Then Peter says the following: by water, which also prefigures the baptism now saving you, not a putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the demand of a good conscience towards God, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The main point is that Peter says the water, the flood itself, typologically foreshadowed something, and in this case, it's baptism for believers. There's nothing in here mentioning the ark, so there is no biblical reason for anyone to keep saying it supports their alternative view. Now, we're going to go to number 2, but ultimately, 1, 2, and 6 all deal with the counting debate. The core question on this whole topic is if Jesus' burial must have constituted 3 full 24-hour periods, or if any part of a day counts as a day in his and the other New Testament writers' minds. We've already shown irrefutable proof that it's Friday from points 1 and 2. You're just not going to argue against the 10 Commandments, people. Luke is, quite honestly, the easiest one to flip to on this topic to end the conversation right from the outset. Luke 23:44 says Jesus died at 3 p.m., and verse 54 says that that day is day 1, was the preparation day before the Sabbath, which 56b says was the regular weekly Sabbath on Saturday, meaning that that was day 2, and 24:1 says the women came early on the first day of the week, i.e. Sunday, as day 3. So, Luke's chronology has a range of 27 to roughly 40 hours between Jesus' death and resurrection. So, he is quite clearly counting partial days as whole days, and what absolutely solidifies this is our next major reason for Friday, and that is with the Emmaus Disciples. I think we know the story about these guys going home, and they encounter Jesus but don't know who he is, and they explain to him what happened. But here's the key verse, verse 21. But we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. And beside all this, today is the 3rd day since these things were done. That is a death blow to the alternative view, as the 3rd day, or 3rd 24-hour period, isn't even over yet, and Jesus is quite clearly alive again, and this qualifies verse 1's first day of the week as the 3rd day from Jesus' death on the cross. So, Luke 24:21 is another death blow to the alternative view, which again, you're not going to hear them bring this up either. Now, this isn't the only example of Luke displaying partial day counting. The first instance is in Luke 2, when Jesus was only 12 years old and going to the Passover with his parents. They go, but when they leave, they realize Jesus isn't there with them. Then they go back to Jerusalem and find him teaching in the temple. Luke says in verse 44 that they traveled for 1 day from Jerusalem. Then in verse 45 it says they turned around, which means It's going to take 1 day for them to get back to Jerusalem. Then, in verse 46, it says that after 3 days, they found him in the temple. When you map this out, you know that their caravan is only traveling when it's daytime. So, from end to end, you don't have 72 hours. You can see partial counting being done here quite clearly. Now, I could hear someone say that I'm trying to frame after 3 days differently. I could hear someone else trying to frame after 3 days differently. So let me give you the last example that no way can be argued against. And it's in Acts 10 with Cornelius. He has his vision of an angel, then sends his men from Caesarea to Joppa, while at the same time Peter is having his own vision. Peter meets them, and they return back to Caesarea, and Cornelius shares his story, and his household is converted. The endpoints are in verses 3 and 30, where Cornelius says that 4 days ago, at the same hour, 3 p.m. from verse 3, that he had his vision of the angel. Now, the in-between verses of this says that Cornelius's men journeyed, and Peter's vision was the next day. They spent the night, and verse 23 says that they traveled back to Caesarea the next day. Then, in verse 24, it says that it was the day after they had got back that Peter met with Cornelius. So, here's all the chronology verses of these events. And the key here is that there's 3 next day mentionings. So, mapped out from 3 p.m. to 3 p.m. from Cornelius' own words is that you have exactly 72 hours between verses 3 and 30, yet he said it was 4 days ago because he counted any part of the calendar day as a day. These 2 additional examples absolutely proves that Luke counts partial days. Now, we're not done beating up number 2, because I'm sure that word after still probably troubles some out there. If you look at the Greek, you have the preposition meta used, which does mean after. What the modern day reader needs to do is to drop their nomenclature of how they think about that word and see the totality of its use in relation to the other references about Jesus rising and who's speaking as well in those scenes. In all, there's 4 verses where meta is used in relation to the 3rd day rising, and 3 come from Jesus himself. In each of these, you will see it doesn't cause any tension in the gospel accounts, starting with Matthew 27:63, having the Pharisees quoting Jesus to Pilate to persuade him to have guards stationed at the tomb. Now, verse 64. Command therefore that the sepulchre be made sure until the 3rd day. Until the 3rd day. The conjunction used here means exactly how we would think of it. The Pharisees are saying all we need to do is get to day 3 and no more need to worry about his followers and any potential uprising movement that's going to undo our, political stranglehold over the Jewish people. This shows how the Pharisees understood Jesus' words and shows that they too counted partial days, and is the 5th reason why it's Friday, because Matthew 27:63 tagged with 64 shows that the word after and until the 3rd day, they're all talking about just landing on that point of the day. And this is also another knockout punch to number 2. Just to add to this is that Matthew said in verse 62 that the Pharisees came the day after the day of preparation, is that we can show the same 3-day layout for Matthew as we did in Luke. Verse 62 qualifies the crucifixion day. And 28:1 says that day 2 was the Sabbath. So, again, we see the same mapped out Friday to Sunday chronology in Matthew's Gospel as well. And for Jesus' statements that include the word meta, is that they all come from Mark, and we know that there are many other passages that talk about a third day rising throughout the Gospels. When Jesus went before the Sanhedrin, the false witnesses quoted him saying, "In 3 days he will build a new temple." The Greek preposition here describes a rising in part of the third day. The crowd at his crucifixion shouted the same thing. Both of these, a person could try to make the attempt to argue against them, but that's pointless because Jesus himself in John 2:19 said exactly that. In 3 days he will rise. And those in the temple repeated his words right back at him in their confusion, and that, he was really talking about his body from verse 21. So there's reason number 6 for Friday. Now, another great way to look at these 3 Markan verses is to note that these are all 3 instances where Jesus foretold his death and resurrection. And what that means is that we have the other 2 synoptic Gospels of Matthew and Luke available to compare the Markan verses against. What you see is that none of them have the Greek preposition meta used in them, just the Greek article. Now, if you were to open up any modern day version of the Bible, is that all of them say on the 3rd day. And the reason for it is because the Greek article is in the dative sense here. Dan Wallace, who is probably one of the most revered Greek New Testament scholars of our day, speaks directly on these verses in his Greek grammar book. He takes Matthew 17:23 and translates the Greek on the 3rd day with adding the sense that it is talking about at a point in time on the 3rd day that Jesus would rise. It doesn't matter if it happened right when the new calendar day switched from day 2 to day 3 at 6 p.m., or at midnight, or at 2:30 a.m., or whenever on day 3, as long as it simply occurs at some point during that 24-hour period. Wallace says this occurs in all of the 3rd day references in the Gospels, just as I showed earlier, with Jesus foretelling, but also it occurs in Luke's post-resurrection scenes with the angels informing the women and Jesus himself to the disciples. Both of these are sandwiched around verse 21's "today is the 3rd day" statement from the Emmaus Disciples. Paul, in 1 Corinthians 15:4, also said that Jesus rose on the 3rd day. And finally, you have Peter to Cornelius in Acts 10:40. The added bonus here is that raised up in the Greek includes the preposition "and" to it, like we saw with Jesus in John 2:19. So, Peter's words in the Greek are crystal clear, and we just added reasons number 7 and 8 to our Friday list, and this completely eliminates number 2 from the alternative view list. Let's now tackle the Bethany journey. John 12:1 says that this took place 6 days before the Passover. Now, someone might not think inclusive counting can be done and used here, and since Leviticus says Passover is on the 14th of Nisan, is that we then still start counting on Thursday, and this still has the Bethany journey happening on the Sabbath and still causes a problem for the Friday person. Sorry, but you're missing something very important about the Passover meal, is that it didn't start right when the 14th of Nisan kicked in. It started in the evening at the sunset. In 3 of the 4 occurrences in the Torah, it says that it is done at evening, with Deuteronomy 16:6 defining it as the going down of the sun. It's not a big deal that Numbers 28:16 didn't include it, because the rest already did. But also is that we even see it with a second Passover that God instituted for those who couldn't keep the regular Passover in the first month earlier in Numbers 9:11. Exodus 12:6 in other versions say at twilight, at dusk, around sundown, and in Hebrew it literally says between the evenings. We see the same Hebrew used in Exodus 16:12 and Leviticus 23:27 and 32 once again come to our aid, showing the same practice done here with the Day of Atonement as with the Passover. Sorry about that, congestion, people. So, twilight was when Moses was instructed by God to eat the Passover meal, which technically has become the 15th of Nisan. The question that one must ask is if this practice continued up during Jesus' time. And the answer is yes, it did. The Second Temple period is marked typically as so. And within here, we have multiple sources that confirm this had continued on. Starting in Ezra 6:19 through 20, where we see the Passover being killed on the 14th. It doesn't mention the evening part, but the 14th is still in play. A complement to this passage comes from the apocryphal book known as First Esdras or Third Ezra, as Jerome called it. This work basically mirrored the book of Ezra, except that it started with the last 2 chapters of 2nd Chronicles, then followed Ezra the rest of the way. First Ezra 7:10 mirrors Ezra 6:19 by repeating the statement about the 14th of the first month. Moving forward from 517, we come to a papyrus from Elephantine, Egypt, dated to 419. This papyrus, known today as the Passover Letter, was discovered in 1907 and dated to 419 BC. You find a lot of articles online. You can find a lot of articles online, but this is a good academic one that you can go and read on JSTOR if you want. Arnold took the fragmented papyrus and translated for us. The dating to 419 BC is because this is a legal document dated to the 5th year of Darius II. Zooming in on the translation is that we can see the counting of 14 being done, likely about the days from the start of Nisan, as it's unmistakable that we have a description of the Feast of Unleavened Bread here, with references to the 15th through the 21st of Nisan. We got 11, and also includes a line about the setting of the sun. This isn't definitive for a 14th evening meal, but it's strongly suggesting it, and that the evening language is simply missing from the broken lines is likely the situation here. Moving forward from 419, we come to the Septuagint translation in the 3rd BC century. The Greek translation of the 3 Torah passages that included the evening reference still includes that in this translation. Our Greek word here is hespera, that can be found in 3 places in the New Testament, where with Luke 24:29 being a slam dunk of the evening position with the Emmaus Disciples with Jesus. A tag-along to the Septuagint is the Jewish philosopher Aristobulus of Alexandria. We don't have any primary source material of his, especially of his commentary on the writings of Moses, but we have 3 secondary sightings from the early church period. Clement of Alexandria is the earliest. He said that Aristobulus lived during the time of the Septuagint being composed. The hard piece is that he says that Aristobulus is mentioned in the book of Maccabees, and the only mentioning of that name is in 2 Maccabees 1:10, that is dated 100 years later than the Torah section of the Septuagint. For our purposes is that Anatolius of Laodicea helps us out in his Paschal canon work. He mentions Aristobulus and other Jewish writers about when to date the annual Passover, and Anatolius said that they said it occurred after the spring equinox in the middle of the first month. The middle is still the 14th, 15th of the Jewish months that are either 29 or 30 days long in the lunar solar calendar that they used. He goes on that Aristobulus added that the Passover is fixed to the 14th day of the month in the evening at the full moon. This is why we hear of Paschal moons each year when figuring out the Easter dates. But the evening mention shows that this continued on during the Greek period. The third mentioning is from Eusebius of Caesarea. The easy thing for us is that he basically copies and pastes what Anatolius said. Our next source comes from the Qumran community with the Dead Sea Scrolls, with Jubilees 49:1 reflecting Exodus 12. The book of Jubilees covers events from Genesis 1 through Exodus 12. 49:1 expands on Exodus 12:6, saying that thou should kill the lamb before it is evening, and that they should eat it by night on the evening of the 15th from the time of the setting of the sun. You can see the writer being very explicit about the eating of the Passover at the transition point from the 14th to the 15th in the evening. Just a sidebar here is that I have seen a lot of people posting about the Enochian calendar a lot, and that it's God's calendar, and claim that Jesus used this calendar and not the regular Jewish calendar that was being used during his time. Sorry, as the Last Supper would have been taking place on Thursday, and because the Enochian calendar never used an intercalary month or days, is that the 14th and 15th always fell on a Tuesday, Wednesday each year. So Jesus was clearly not using the Enochian calendar. Next up is Philo of Alexandria, who was a Jewish philosopher that wrote a ton of works that can still be read today. You can see his time overlap that of with Jesus. The two works listed here have him speaking on the Passover tradition and says in special laws that the Passover festival occurs every year, with the last line saying, in accordance with the ancient historical accounts, i.e. the law of Moses, and does put it on the 14th of the month. He even brings up the second Passover availability on the 14th of the second month, like in Numbers 9:11, and are instructed to do it in the same manner as the first Passover. Last up is Josephus. He said in Wars that Passover was when the Romans first put the siege on, but somewhat famously said that the lambs were killed on the 9th to the 11th hour. What makes that famous? Well, what time did Jesus die? The 9th hour. It's not a coincidence, folks. Josephus said in Antiquities that Passover is on the 14th day of the lunar month, when the sun is in Aries, the constellation, and the eating of it occurred till the next day, the 15th. Josephus has one other place where he mentions the Passover on the 14th of Nisan. So we see a perfect following of the original mandate in Exodus 12 for when the Passover is to be ate, and we do see the same in the New Testament, as John says the day of preparation occurred before the Passover in verse 14, and before the Sabbath in verse 31. Indirectly, he is saying that the Passover that year fell on the Sabbath. Thus, our counting of the 6 days before the Passover does not start on Thursday, but on Friday, and thus there is no Sabbath violation. But if you're a Thursday person, then you are breaking it. Oh, how the tables have turned, huh? One more counting point to make is from John 20:26 with Thomas. It says Jesus appeared again 8 days later. Guess what? Our special word meta is used here. And remember, we saw the partial day counting from Matthew 27:63 with it. Therefore, we can see that Jesus reappeared on the following Sunday to Thomas. It's like he got his own personal Sunday resurrection proof, as he wasn't there the week before. All told is that we can show the same 3-day layout for John now too. Verses 14 and 31 describe that the Passover fell on the Sabbath that year, and chapter 20, verse 1 also speaks of the first day of the week, which then creates the same mapped out Friday to Sunday chronology. So he, John, is quite clearly counting partial days as whole days, and is the 9th reason of why it's Friday, and eliminates the Bethany journey from the alternative view list. This takes us to point number 8, which comes from Chuck Missler. Now, if you're a big fan of his, that's fine. I believe that Chuck was a believer, and even though we clearly disagree on the day of the crucifixion, and by extension his interpretation for the first 69 weeks of the 70 weeks prophecy. His dates for a Saturday triumphal entry on April 6th is then the 10th of Nisan in his dating. Thus, April 10th of 32 AD is the crucifixion date, and the equivalent of the 14th of Nisan in his reckoning. So, his Wednesday view is this on the Jewish calendar, correct? Yeah. Now, looking at this, can you spot the inconsistency here done by him? It's his dating of the Bethany journey. Remember that in his display of showing Friday to be wrong is that he counted backwards 6 days to show that it would land you on the Sabbath. And Thursday people did this as well. So we put that on the calendar, and Thursday pushes everything then back by 1 day. So everything should then shift back by 1 more day for Wednesday, right? And should look like this then, and make the triumphal entry be on Friday, the 9th of Nisan. Because just remember, you read that, it says the next day. So there's no separating Jesus' Bethany journey and then his triumphal entry with a day in between there. There's no doing that. But if you do that, then Jesus acting as the Passover lamb being selected on the 10th of Nisan from Exodus 12 goes away. But this display doesn't mesh with Chuck's system. So what happened here? What happened was that Chuck counted the days differently when it came to Friday and Wednesday. And I can prove it. As from his own words saying, on this reckoning, meaning that he used non-inclusive counting to make it appear Friday was an error. But when it came to Wednesday, is that he counted inclusively so that Jesus' triumphal entry would still occur on the 10th of Nisan. You can see I am right by going straight to his online article and scroll down to where he goes day by day for the Passion Week, and see that I am right in this observation just by adding in the numbers yourself. I personally believe that Chuck knew what he was doing because of his own words, and when he, made it appear Friday to cause some type of Sabbath violation. You can tell that it was like, oh yeah, I know that I did it here, but I'm not going to do it over there against my own view. Yeah, I mean, it's just like, come on, dude. So, other than being inconsistent, is that with Chuck's system, we know the Saturday entry, we know that the Saturday entry and Wednesday crucifixion are both in error. And if you were to look up Passover dates in Jack Finnegan's Handbook of Biblical Chronology, is that he has a table of Nisan 14 dates for the years 27 through 34 AD. He used Fotheringham's astronomy list and also a second column using Parker and Duberstein's Babylonian chronology to throw a potential intercalary month for certain years. This table shows that there are only 2 Friday Passover years for the crucifixion in 30 or 33 AD as potential years. For 32 AD, you see that Monday, not Wednesday, was the Passover for that given year. And from this table, Thursday Passover only occurs on 27 AD, which is way too early for a crucifixion date. And a Wednesday Passover only occurs on 34 AD, which is way too late when you start factoring in the chronology of Paul, especially with his conversion. So, none of Chuck's dates for the Passion Week are correct. Why he used those was because of Sir Robert Anderson's book in The Coming Prince, is that he had these dates. But FYI, is that Sir Robert Anderson had a Thursday crucifixion, not a Wednesday one in mind. So Chuck shifted that system as well to fit his own. So I'm sorry to his fans out there. I'm not trying to, just, beat up on the guy, but I'm just trying to point out, this is what he was doing. He was shifting it all over the place to kind of make it look legit, and none of it was. But other than Chuck being very inconsistent with his representation for the Passion Week, again, I'll say is that I think he was truly a believer. I'm not taking that away from him, just from other things that I've watched of his. Let God be the judge at the end of the day. So it's pretty easy to see that Daniel's 69 weeks does not support the alternative view in any shape. Before closing out with Matthew 12:40's last, supporting view for the alternative view, there's another chronology topic to cover within this study, because if improperly understood, is that it can cause a lot of drastic shifting of the Jewish calendar days in one's, calendar system. And it all deals with the Last Supper accounts. The main underlying issue is whether or not the Last Supper was a full-on traditional Passover meal. This doesn't affect whether or not Jesus was crucified on Friday or rose on Sunday. What it affects is charting the Jewish calendar on a timeline and trying to determine the year of the crucifixion. So, anyone who's been chin deep in this topic knows that academically there's 2 representations of the Last Supper. And to some, and maybe most, believe that it causes tension within the Gospels in that they're contradicting each other within their accounts. The 2 are the Johannine representation, Gospel of John, that places the crucifixion on the 14th of Nisan, before the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is on the 15th of Nisan. And the other is the Synoptic representation of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which apparently have the 15th of Nisan as the crucifixion day. You can just go hit pause right now if you want and just Google Nisan 14 or 15 for crucifixion, and you'll see both sides duking it out. But what you're not going to find is a whole lot of reconciliation between the 2. You're just going to get a lot of people avoiding the tension verses on both sides and saying, I'm over here, here's all my reasons why. Well, what about those troubling ones? It's kind of basically what we've been doing this whole entire video, is dealing with all that. And guess what? We're not going to do that here either. We're going to actually show that there is harmony between all 4 gospel accounts. So here we go. John's account clearly puts the Last Supper the day before the Passover. But when you look at the Synoptic accounts, is that they all put the Last Supper on the first day of unleavened bread, and therefore the crucifixion after the Passover meal. This seems to be a clear contradiction, or to say the least, some really strong tension between the two representations. First thing is that the Last Supper should not be placed on Thursday for the calendar, but on Friday night that goes right into Jesus' trial and crucifixion on the day portion of Friday. This all deals with the overlapping of calendars, as we saw with the resurrection. Roman and Jewish weeks are staggered by 6 hours, so for the overlap of Thursday-Friday with day 5-6 of the weekly calendars, you have the following. And adding in the night and day shades, you have the Last Supper on Thursday evening of the Roman calendar and day 6 of the Jewish calendar, which is on the 14th of Nisan in the Johannine representation, and on the 15th in the Synoptic representation. How this is reconciled is by carefully looking at what the Synoptics say and realize that they are not placing the Last Supper on the 15th of Nisan, but actually on the 14th of Nisan, just like John. Look again at the 3 synoptic verses I showed earlier. Both Mark and Luke say that the first day of unleavened bread is when they kill the Passover. If you take that exactly as it says, is that would be wrong by Jesus and the disciples, as it's abundantly clear that the Passover lamb is killed on the 14th of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which starts on the 15th. All 3 contemporary sources agree that the killing of the lamb happens on the 14th. I'm not talking about the eating, but the killing of the lamb, which makes it appear both Mark and Luke in violation now. Why it's not is because all 3 synoptics use the Feast of Unleavened Bread synonymously with the Passover, because essentially they are just one and the same festival and not 2 separate ones. Why this is biblically sound is because in Exodus 12:8, we see that unleavened bread was ate with the sacrificed Passover lamb. It's part of the same feast known today as the Passover Seder meal. 9 verses down, you see the Feast of Unleavened Bread was instituted on the 14th of Nisan at evening. This exactly mirrors the Passover description in verse 6. This is not a contradiction with Leviticus. We've seen the evening language causes a calendar day change to the 15th. So, in Leviticus 23:6, instead of saying on the 14th at evening, Moses just said the 15th this time. It's the same difference. What merges the two more together is that God says that there's 3 feasts a year that all males must come attend, and says the 3 are unleavened bread, weeks, and booths. The Passover is part of the first mandated feast, and we see this in all 3 synoptic accounts leading up to the Last Supper meal. In Matthew, you see Jesus refer to it as the Feast of the Passover. The Pharisees just call it the feast, and Matthew himself said the Feast of Unleavened Bread. All 3 are the same thing and can be used interchangeably with one another, because everybody knows in that time period, oh yeah, we know what you're talking about. The feast, the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, it's the same thing. In Mark's account, he says the Feast of the Passover and of Unleavened Bread in the same clause. He merges them together himself. There's no room for distinction here. So again, you have them clearly being used interchangeably. And in Luke 22:1, you couldn't be any more explicit with him saying the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is called the Passover. And the sinking scene between all the Gospels is actually Pilate's releasing of a prisoner at Passover, which we know was Barabbas in these accounts. There's no way that Pilate is holding court or going to execute someone after the official feast has started. And the Pharisees didn't want this either, because they knew the people would uproar against them for such an act to be done during an official feast day. They had to get all this get rid of Jesus plot done before the feast had kicked in. And just to add to this is that you even have Josephus in Antiquities merging the two by calling it simply the Passover festival, starting on the 14th, but feasting for 7 days, which we know is talking about unleavened bread, but he applies it to the Passover because they're all saying it's the same thing in their head. So the Synoptics and the Gospel of John agree with one another with the Last Supper and crucifixion taking place on the 14th of Nisan, with the galvanizing verse to this is 1 Corinthians 11:23, where Paul said that the Last Supper and the betrayal took place on the same night. You cannot disconnect the Last Supper calendarically from Jesus' trial, chastisement, crucifixion, and death. There's no New Testament tension between the Synoptics and John, as long as you recognize and maybe accept the interchangeable use of the terms Passover and unleavened bread in the Bible that starts on the evening of the 14th of Nisan. Now, because of this basically means that the Last Supper meal was not an official Passover meal, but just a regular meal, as they were a day early compared to the rest of the nation that's there in Jerusalem right now. And it's clear that Jesus and his followers followed the Sanhedrin's calendar when you look at all the other example of festivals taking place in the Gospel of John that Jesus attended. He went to the same ones that they were putting on, as they were the leaders and the ones who set the calendars for each year for those. And John clearly puts the Last Supper before the official Passover feast and reiterates this in Jesus' trial scene and also his burial. He does it 3 times. Now, even though the Last Supper is taking place 24 hours ahead of the official Passover feast, is that it's still possible that Jesus had the disciples set everything up as a regular Passover meal, as all 3 synoptics clearly say they're going to eat the Passover. The text clearly has Jesus eating with them as well. The ultimate problem is that there's no way to know what exactly was set up, but you should start with the idea that, yeah, okay, it was the whole 9 yards that was present. And then if you were to, be on the other side saying, well, this wasn't a Passover meal, is that you would then argue that say that none of the Gospels mention a lamb there or bitter herbs being present. People would say, well, no, this was an official Passover. They went, they did everything. They will say, sorry, that's an argument from silence. And the 3 synoptics clearly say the disciples went ahead and prepared the Passover. So it's implied that both were present. Now, all we know for sure, though, is that bread and wine were there that night from the institution of Holy Communion. The bread discussion is interesting, as the Greek word for unleavened bread is odzimos. 9 times it occurs in the New Testament, with 5 in the Synoptics, 2 in Acts, both still referring to the festival, and 2 with Paul in 1 Corinthians telling us that we, believers, are unleavened because of Christ's sacrifice. And this is the word in the Septuagint as well. But that is not the word found in any of the gospel accounts with the institution of the Eucharist. Or with Paul in 1 Corinthians 11:23, the word here is artos, and that word is found in some major scenes in the Gospels. You have the Lord's Prayer, the feeding of the 5,000, and also therefore the 4,000 too. Jesus saying that he is the bread of life. And Hebrews actually has the last use of it in the New Testament, describing the showbread from the tabernacle. Another main historical one that people should consider in this is after Pentecost, it says that those that were accepting Jesus were breaking artos, bread, every day together. So from the no side is that you could say that the formula of giving thanks, breaking the bread, and distributing it to eat appears in the feeding of the 5,000, which was clearly not unleavened. It would have been regular loaf bread, leavened bread. So it's also hard to imagine that during Pentecost that they kept using unleavened bread throughout all, getting of new believers coming into the church. So at the Last Supper is that it seems to be more consistent with the word artos used throughout the New Testament, that the bread used there was leavened. And you see these words used together when Jesus had to explain to the disciples to beware the zume of artos of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Beware the leaven of the bread of the Pharisees. That scene has both terms used interchangeably. Now, the yes side, those who'd say, nope, this was still a regular Passover meal, could say that, sure, but the Synoptics don't need to say anything more about the bread being unleavened, as they all start off telling us that it's actually the first day of unleavened bread. And from the Septuagint, you have examples of both of those terms being used together as well. So it's not just definitive that, artos always means leaven bread. It can be both. Personally, I think the more textually consistent route is that the bread used in all of those scenes follows the same from the feeding of the 5,000 and 4,000, which was regular bread, which was leavened. Again, though, neither side can ultimately prove who's right. All I can say definitively is that one day we will find out at the marriage supper of the Lamb, where Jesus said he, and us as well, will eat the same bread as the apostles did that night in the upper room. Now, all of this takes us back to the beginning with the main verse that causes too many Bible students unnecessary worry and incorrectly placing the crucifixion on either Wednesday or Thursday. The bottom line, though, is that simply charting this out is that you are one night short, and really one day short as well, with a literal reading of Matthew 12:40. So the only way that this verse doesn't cause an internal contradiction with the rest of the New Testament, clear-cut partial day counting method, is if this verse is not taken literally, but idiomatically. The burden of proof is still on me to prove this, and to do so is that it starts with the fact that Jesus was obviously quoting Jonah 1:17b. If you are or have ever wondered the difference of why the Old Testament says fish and the New Testament says whale, is that difference is part of the discussion here, and also wondered about Jesus' statement about being in the heart of the earth, as that phrase is found nowhere else in the Bible. Now, within the story is that only verse 17 offers any type of chronological indication of the length of time that Jonah was in the belly of the great fish. So, by the book of Jonah alone, is that one can only currently take it is literally, and that the literal view here is that nothing else internally within the story says that this can be taken any different. Which then begs the question is if there are any other places in the Old Testament that does use this phrase in any historical context. And yes, there is. There's two other Old Testament examples found in 1 Samuel 30:12 and Esther 4:16, where each section offering connective chronological details to them. The Hebrew in the first two cases are exactly the same, and with Esther's, it's barely changed up in its order that makes no different than the prior two. Starting with 1 Samuel's account is that the context is about David fighting with the Amalekites. It begins with describing David and his army leaving Gath and going to Ziklag, which is about a 7-mile journey. But the main thing here is the highlighted piece that David arrived on day 3. The last part of verses 1 and 2 describe that David found out that the Amalekites had invaded Ziklag and took the Israelite women and children captive. David inquires if he should attack, and God says, go, because, hey, I'm God and I know if you'll win or not. And he says, you will. Along the way, an Egyptian was found, and David gave him food and water because, now listen to this, for he had eaten no bread nor drunk any water for 3 days and 3 nights. So there's our phrase. Now, was this a full 72 hours? No, as the Egyptian, who was a slave to an Amalekite, said, 3 days ago he was left for dead by his master because he fell sick. So, basically, the Amalekites left Ziklag the same time David left Gath on their way there. Now, it's likely that the Amalekite scouts saw them coming, as it's only 7 miles away, so they left right away to avoid David's army coming to town. Take note that 29:11 says David departed early in the morning. So, the counting of day 1 begins during the morning of day 1, which makes night 3 occur on day 4, but verses 1 and 13 said that his arrival was on the 3rd day. What adds to this layout is the Egyptian agrees to take David to where the Amalekites are at, and verse 17 says that David slew them from twilight even unto the evening of the next day. Textually, this is tagged to the 3rd day arrival of David, and his attack lasted all of day 4. To be exhaustive is that the Septuagint translator saw the same, as verse 1 has the dative articles, just like we saw with all the New Testament, the 3rd day verses that we saw earlier. Verse 13 says, today being 3 days, and this too reflects our 4th point with the Emmaus Disciples to Jesus in Luke 24:21. So, charted out, we see that 3 days and 3 nights didn't mean 72 hours, nor even need to touch all 3 nights to still be used by the Egyptian. So, 1 Samuel 30 needs to be interpreted idiomatically and not literally. Now for Esther 4:16. Chapter 3 is Haman's plot against the Jews and him getting the authority of the king to make a decree across the whole empire to kill all the Jews. Chapter 4 is Queen Esther agreeing to help by going in front of the king without being requested for, which can be a death penalty offense if the king isn't happy about it. Her reply to Mordecai was to have all Jews in Susa fast for 3 days, night and day, and she will do the same. The whole point was to get everyone into prayer for God to support her endeavor. Verse 5:1. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. The Hebrew matches that of 1 Samuel 31, and in the Septuagint we see the same as 1 Samuel 31. But here the preposition is included like we saw in Acts 10:40. So all of this is charted out is that Esther met with Mordecai during the daytime of day 1. No guy off the street is going to go into the queen's house during the night hours. That just ain't going to happen. She then requests of him for a 3-day and 3-night fast, but 5:1's context has her going before the king during the daytime while he was at work on the throne. At night, the king goes to banquet, goes to bed, while call upon, his queens, his harems, and his concubines, which means that, again, not all 3 nights are checked off here, and means that the 3 days and 3 nights phrase of Esther 4:16 needs to be interpreted idiomatically and not literally. Thus, we too should be seeing Jonah 1:17's use as an idiom as well, and by extension, Jesus' use of that phrase. It's not necessary to still try to check off all 3 nights and all 3 days like here with the Talk Genesis article. It's very good in most respects, but its error is that they couldn't accept the idiomatic language and takes the person on an inappropriate dot-connecting journey of verses to make a person think that the heart of the earth wasn't speaking about the grave, but of earthly rulers and judges. How I know this is because Jesus wasn't citing the Hebrew version of Jonah 1:17, but the Septuagint version. We see that with first the same Greek wording used that is translated into whale. The better thinking is that we see the same use in the Septuagint of Genesis 1:21, where the root Hebrew word is tanin, that is connected a lot to dragons, serpents, large sea creatures, and even Leviathan in the Old Testament. So, some type of large sea creature swallowed Jonah whole, and the whole description from Jonah himself reflects that he himself believes that he's in the underworld at this point. The specific terminology and description used throughout the whole of the chapter is in no way has Jonah thinking that he was still alive somehow in the creature's belly. He talks about hoping that God would answer his prayer by bringing him back to life from Sheol, where Jonah said he was going to be imprisoned forever. So, when the Greek translators got a hold of this story, is that they too had that thinking going on. Now, look at verse 4's red highlight, with Jonah being casted into the depths of the heart of the seas, and verse 7 saying that he went down into the earth. It's from these 2 Greek verses where Jesus formed that phrase at the end of 12:40 in Matthew. This adds to the reasons from my previous videos about Christ's descent and the spirits in prison, as Peter understood it this way too, with Jesus being in the underworld on day 2 and hired out the Old Testament saints from Abraham's bosom. And this understanding provides the only textual explanation to Matthew 12:52 through 53's parenthetical comment about deceased saints coming out of the graves after Jesus' resurrection. Don't get tripped up with these verses coming before chapter 28. That's all about the post-resurrection scenes. So, the idiomatic explanation is the correct understanding, and there's no internal contradiction within Matthew or comparatively with the other 3 gospel accounts. So, the critics, like the Skeptics Annotated Bible, is that your comment on this classic case of either or is a classic case of either or fallacy being used by them. And once again, we see that a line item from the alternative view actually is a reason for Friday and is our final and 10th one of why the New Testament is crystal clear that Jesus was crucified on Friday and rose on Sunday.
Reminder, hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. But in the meantime, stay salty.